Welcome to Newsroom, brought to you by Insurance Brokers Alliance. And of course, this is where we talk about news events from far and wide with our panel. Tonight, welcome John Prenergast.
Thanks, Bill.
Nice to have you with us.
Very nice to be here.
Another familiar face, Carolyn Dean.
Hello, Val.
Good. No doubt you're seething with opinions about some of the things we're going to talk about
I've got
today.
an opinion on your shirt.
What do you think about my shirt? You like it?
A bit like Disco Bell.
Well, you know, autumn is approaching, so I thought I'd just warm up the cockles of everybody's hearts. They'll either want to watch or look away. We might even soften the view of the cameras on you guys.
It certainly detracts attention from us.
Exactly, John. That's what it's all about.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in the news, the GCSB, it turns out, you know, of course, when we've discussed this several times here on Newsroom, but we've often come to the conclusion, well, if you've got nothing to hide, then you're in no danger because they're looking for spies, they're looking for people attacking New Zealand. It seems extremely evident that what the GCSB has been doing, with or without the government's knowledge, we've got Peter Dunn suggesting perhaps the ministers didn't even know and there was no warrant, basically spying on rival contestants for the top job in the World Trade Organisation to give old Tim Grosser a bit of a hand. Now, basically, I mean, anybody with any common sense is outraged by this, it seems. You seem quite conservative people saying, well, at the very best, it's borderline. John, is this kosher? Should this be going on?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't have any problem at all with the GCSB using its powers to look at the activities of people that it should be looking at. And I'm quite comforted by the fact that they've got the ability to do that. But this just seems a gross abuse of that power to be spying on rival contenders to Tim Grosser. It just seems bizarre that they think that's an appropriate use of that power.
The Prime Minister hasn't said very much. He's just said, well, we don't comment on... Back to the old thing, we don't comment on stolen material.
As far as I'm aware.
As far as I'm aware, yeah. I would imagine that behind closed doors he's absolutely seething if he didn't know anything about it, because basically it's confirming what everybody had always said, and which he'd already denied. You're kind of wondering what's being muttered about whose head's going to roll over this one.
And that's the problem. It gives oxygen to the Nicky Hagans of this world who have been making these claims previously. That now there seems there's some substance to it.
And when you put it alongside the report which was given to the UK government as well, what did you think about it, Carolyn?
I don't know, I'm sort of a bit with John Key on this one. Teflon John, just sort of, oh well, you don't ask too many questions, because it doesn't bother me what the undertaking was. They were searching these people's names online and in emails. Well, I can search your name online and find out what people are saying about you. I can look on Facebook, I can do a hashtag search, and I can look at what people are talking about on Facebook and on Google. So, I don't think that's too far removed.
GCSB's probably got greater investigative powers than you on Facebook, Carolyn, I'd imagine.
And so it's an online search and emails. Well, I can't search people's emails, but in this day and age, you really have to understand that when you put something in an email, it could be being read. So that's kind of the age that we live in. So I think it's just good market research. If you're going for a job, it's going to benefit New Zealand if you get it. We'll do a bit of...
Is that true, though?
Research.
Benefit New Zealand or benefit Tim Grosser?
Well, would it? The World Trade Organisation... I think it would.
Well, it's probably the very thin rationale on which it's based, that if Tim Grosser was in there, it might be good for us.
Well, I read somewhere today that the chair, as in a lot of these things, has to maintain absolute neutrality. So his ability to exert any influence,
which of course was the basis on which we got onto the Security Council, because we were such an open and honest country.
Well, there's the suggestion that the GCSB has been spying on rivals for that as well.
Yeah. And there's it's being suggested that in political circles now there is some embarrassment because of this, that we're not as squeaky clean as we purported ourselves to be.
Well, John Key seemed to be saying that South Korea wouldn't care. A reporter said to him, what do you think South Korea think of this, since that's where
so he's speaking for them now.
And he said, I don't think they would care.
So it was a good point was made on national radio today, that the Asians, of course, are very polite people. If you're a guest in their country, they will not say anything whilst you're there. And so this is possibly the reason they weren't saying anything, but one wonders how they would be feeling about the fact that they were spied upon, when we've claimed that, of course, we're squeaky clean.
I think Carolyn makes a good point, though, about stuff that you write an email or put out there on the internet. I mean, anything that you put out there, you've got to be aware that it could be published anywhere one day.
Right.
So I think when you're writing that sort of stuff, you need to be thinking of that in the back of your mind.
There is no security.
No.
And I mean, it didn't work. The tactic didn't work. What would have been more effective would have been if they had set up some Google ads with pertinent keywords in them that would come up when the committee that were making the selections were searching certain things on the internet. You know what I mean? So if you're on the employment committee and you start searching something pertinent, say aubergine, the price of aubergines, if you know that one of those people is going to be searching for that, then you put that in a keyword and an ad pops up saying Tim Grosser is a really good guy.
Actively manipulate their searches.
Exactly. You don't have to have aubergine in the ad itself, but in the keywords of the ad.
We're getting a few clues here how it's done, folks.
Yeah. Well, somebody got a job recently for a company called Mind Valley, and what he did was he researched all the people that worked for Mind Valley and the sorts of things they were into, and then he set up ads on Facebook, so when they were online and looking for things, these ads were popping up with this guy saying, I really want to work for you, have a look at my website. And he set up a whole website based on how much he wanted to work for them, and they employed him.
That's good.
Yeah. So it's
mind you, that basis of promoting himself, you'd say if this guy can promote himself that well, he can promote the company.
Yeah, and his website was great.
He's just demonstrating his skills, really.
Very creative and innovative, and he was successful, so I'd be recommending that approach to John and Tim.
Well, we're going to see...
rather than slinking around in the background.
Rather than slinking around.
Andrew Little, of course, is calling it outrageous and wants an investigation by the Inspector General, and probably, that will go ahead, and we will hear one way or the other just exactly what has gone on. But I was very interested in Peter Dunn's comments, and I thought to me, they were the most significant of the lot. And he said it could well be, and thinking about what he said, I think he could be right, it could well be there was no ministerial warrant for this investigation, which means, as he said, that they were doing it by themselves. Now that is...
The officials were doing it.
That's pretty scary, and he said he was rather concerned about that, and I think we should be too, that a department running away and doing things outside the ministerial approval, which they are supposed to have.
But if they were doing it, what were they doing with any information that they got?
That's true.
Who were they giving it to?
Well, we don't know that yet.
Because it would only seem to be useful for Timothy Grosser, wouldn't it?
Yes, well, one would think so. Yeah. But it has actually, I guess what we're finding out these days is that there's always been spy activity going on, hasn't there? We've never known what has been collected, what has been listened to. Perhaps it's kind of going along the line that we now know a heck of a lot more than we ever knew.
It's interesting actually when you think back of how spies are perceived. They were almost the good guys, weren't they? They were
That's right, yeah.
The clandestine sort of manoeuvres that they were out on, getting information and beating the bad guys.
And our New Zealand spies, I can remember back in the 70s and whatnot, when suitcases were left on bus stops, and we always regarded them as a bit of a joke and with a good degree of incompetence. This is before you were born.
Peter Sellers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we wait and see what happens with that one with interest. Another sticky one for the government to deal with at the moment, of course, is the fact the Salvation Army, Carolyn, has said, look, we just can't deal with taking on a whole lot of state houses. We don't think we've got the expertise to manage them. There's a massive amount of money has to be invested in it. Of course, the opposition's saying, well, this means that the whole thing was just the big debacle we thought it was. Yeah. But is it the end of it?
No, it's not. Right. I think the Salvation Army have wisely said, this is not what we do. We don't have the resources, we don't have the expertise. And they're looking at the stock and saying, well, the maintenance is way behind where it should be. And we all know that. You can see state houses as you drive down the street.
Why do you think? Why is the government let those houses run down?
The Salvation Army said it's a succession of changing governments and policies that haven't been tight enough and not forward thinking enough, and it's something that's difficult for governments to be in. The city council have some social housing, and it's not easy to be in because there's really not a committee.
But it's a lot better condition than government houses.
Yes, and I think maybe that's because it's just tighter and it's
a soft target too. I think it's easy, to cut funding for something like maintenance of state housing. Yeah, it's a popular sort of thing. But this whole social infrastructure area is interesting. That we've been through the PPP, the public-private partnership phase, with hard infrastructure like building prisons and toll roads and that sort of stuff. And depending on your perspective, that's been relatively successful, I think, in getting some of those assets off the government's balance sheet into corporate balance sheets, run more efficiently. They're now looking to do the same sort of thing with some of the soft infrastructure in the social services sector, and Housing New Zealand houses are somewhere in the middle, I guess.
There's a real push for it with water too.
Yeah, there will be.
Yeah.
And water's going to be a huge issue in the next 10 years probably.
Well, taking off councils.
Yes,
We'll come back to that.
And there'll be privatisation of water. But all the lots of the government at the moment is exploring social impact bonds, which are looking at some social services and saying, well, is there a different way to finance these rather than just the government providing contract funding each year for NGOs to deliver social services? They're talking about trying to attract investment into some of those areas, just as they have with PPPs and the hard infrastructure. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this.
There's going to be some kind of model, hopefully, come out of this phase, which is almost a trial and error phase at the moment, and pulling other entities together. And I think it's almost like when we were looking for a landfill in Southland, there was all these opportunities or potential opportunities that never worked out, and they kept pushing down those tracks. And while that was happening, all of a sudden over here, somebody came from left field and said, "Oh, we've got a perfect solution," and that was to put the landfill at Kings Bend, where they were already extracting.
Yeah, it's a big hole that needed filled.
Yeah. So I wonder if that's going to happen here. Like, we'll have a few sort of misfires, and then, but as that's happening, there'll be something else sort of bubbling away in the background that then comes to the fore as a good solution. But I don't know. It's hard to see with the council, with their social housing. The only benefit I could really see was that the maintenance was looked after by a professional, in a professional way.
And
not
someone
private.
local to blame if it wasn't.
And the rent was slightly lower than market, but not much. So the benefit of council being involved was somewhat hard to justify, because those people weren't paying much less for.
You mean financially hard to justify?
The benefit to the tenant was only something like $10 a week,
right,
under market, and for the amount of effort and money and energy that it took on council side to provide that, the $10 a week seemed a hard one to justify. So
there is the benefit though in this kind of housing, all these kind of housings, that the tenants can move in there, and generally speaking, they can look forward to a long-term rental.
That's one of the challenges with it though. As say a family with 4 kids moves into a state house, if they have a long-term rental and the kids have left, and sometimes you've still got 1 or 2 parents living in the house, that don't need 3 or 4 bedroom house, and meanwhile there's families waiting for a house, can't get in because they haven't moved.
Right.
So they've got to try and.
So that's an issue which needs to be addressed, even if they say, okay, well,
we
will sign you up as long as there's this many people in the house, but if it's not, then you will be under an obligation to move on to a smaller one of our other houses. But for the elderly, for example, they don't need to be in a flat which belongs to a private landlord, is then sold, and they're told, look, you have to move out in 3 or 4 weeks.
So private landlord may, perhaps that's not the perfect solution, but I see that IHC were interested in managing or buying 1,000 of these state houses. So they're obviously, although Salvation Army aren't, and that's for 8,000 of them, maybe they would be for a smaller number. And if IHC can do it with 1,000, and
the Army hasn't ruled out. They haven't ruled out. If they can get a partnership with somebody who can help them manage it.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening at the moment. There's all this jostling, looking at all these social issues, and this one's housing, but all these social issues. There's a lot of agencies in that space at the moment just looking at, well, is there a different way to approach dealing with some of these intractable social issues particularly?
You need a sort of a financial arm.
Yep.
And
that's what they've set up. Yeah, that's exactly what they've set up. The government set up process where they got financial intermediaries and social service providers, and we were involved as one of the intermediaries looking at some of these issues, and that's exactly
the
what
Community Trust was.
No, I was involved in a philanthropic capacity from Philanthropy New Zealand, an intermediary, and we had a financial intermediary as part of our group. Trying to matchmake really. to try and bring finance together from philanthropic sector, the investment sector, wherever it came from, to try and address some of these.
So the will is there.
Absolutely.
The will's there, John. Yeah.
And it's really just a testing phase at the moment, and that's what we're seeing with the Salvation Army. They've had a look and they've withdrawn. They may well re-engage at a later time.
Right.
So we're hopeful.
Yeah. Well, I mean it is a sign of well-balanced management, really, isn't it? A considered approach. Yeah. So it might not be the end of it. Bill English didn't seem to be too fazed by it.
No.
Others, because obviously the opposition's going to say that it's a complete mess. And I think what Campbell Roberts says. I mean, clearly the state housing itself isn't a mess. And there was an article in the news today. I think that suggested 1.5 billion to fix it. It's a lot of money for a new roof.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say, John?
I was just going to say, I'm sure Bill English gets it. He's got the financial perspective of it, but he's also got the social interest in it too. So he's quite a good person to have as Minister of Finance, I think, looking at these sorts of issues and trying to crack them. He's
not particularly reactive, as he takes it.
He's very considered. I think.
Very considered, yes. Yeah. We'll see what happens with that one. Of course, the another thing the government's involved in at the moment is they've appointed retired Australian Judge Ian Callaghan to try and sort out the David Bain mess, you can really say. It can't be described as anything else. We've already had one judge do an investigation. The then Minister of Justice, Judith Collins, then called upon a QC to declare that invalid. And she, being a lawyer herself, she probably had her own reasons for doing that. We've got Ian Callaghan in there now. Is this going to solve it? Do you reckon this will be the finish of it?
I think it'll finish it. I don't think it'll solve it from David Bain's perspective. When you look at the questions that judge has been asked to provide answers to, he has to advise the Minister whether he's satisfied that David Bain has proven his innocence on the balance of probabilities. And if that's the case, he has to say whether he believes David Bain's innocence has been proven beyond reasonable doubt. Well, that's a very big hurdle.
Well, you don't even have to prove
innocence
to be
I know, but for
guilty.
Compensation purposes you do.
Right.
And if he has to answer those two questions categorically, I can't see any way in the world that David Bain will be getting compensation.
Is it fair on him? I mean, we've all got opinions about David Bain, but one thing that went through my mind is this guy has got a reputation. He is going to hear all the evidence. I mean, we've got opinions one way or the other. We've heard bits of evidence. It's biased. We've got everything going there. But this guy from Australia, he's going to hear the lot, and he's finally going to come up with an opinion from his point of view. That's I'm very interested in it.
And it's going to take him 6 months and $400,000.
Right. Another $400,000.
I read the book. Well, there's two books. There's one by Joe Karam.
Okay.
Which presents the arguments for David Bain being innocent.
Right.
And then there's another book that I read by James McNeish, which presents the opposite, that he's guilty. And I read the first one by Joe Karam, and I thought, oh, the poor soul, he's innocent.
Yes.
And then I read the James McNeish book, and I thought, oh, he did it.
So
it's so subjective, I think.
Did you read the Joe Karam book again?
Depends on what the latest one you read.
You got one in each hand, you see leaning from side to side as you go from page to page.
I just think it's going to be a very difficult thing to come out with a definitive answer to, given the passage of time. I mean, it's 20 years since it happened.
It is.
I mean, I wonder if David Bain himself knows.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, he may well have done it and blocked the whole thing out. Who knows what's going on in there.
So why did the person that did the original report that said he said he was entitled
to compensation.
Why did he believe that he only needed to come up to the standard of reasonable doubt?
Well, I think that's the issue, that the question that they've been asked to address, I think he was asked to perhaps address a lesser question than what this latest one has.
Why is that?
Well, I sense there's a reluctance to pay compensation. And so if he's framed the questions in such a way that it's almost impossible to get a yes answer to it.
It sounds like the standard is, what did we say, probably innocent. It sounds like that is the standard for compensation. So why did the first report say that that he believed that he only needed...
about it, they thought that he had made some
significant errors of law.
But he also said he believed that the standard he had to meet was probably innocent.
But not beyond reasonable doubt.
But not beyond
this
reasonable
one's
doubt.
been asked.
This one's gone up a tier.
So they changed. So
it sounds like that's where the waste of money comes.
If His Honour Ian Callaghan comes back and says, I think he's innocent, and he should be paid out. They go back and say, no, we'll go back and get a judge from Britain now, and we're changing the criteria.
Yeah, I don't know if they can do it again. I think if he did come out and say that, I think there would be.
It's got to be done.
Yeah.
But it is a massive reluctance, that actually...
Well, it's the precedent too, it sets.
It's the precedent, that's what...
That'll be what they're worried about.
How many people, though, are in this situation?
Well, they've murdered 5 members of their family and been charged with it and in prison for 20 years. Not many, I suppose.
No.
But there will be some that have been in prison incorrectly.
Yeah.
Well, Arthur Alp Thomas was one.
Yeah.
And he got $1 million, and that was
a lot of
30 years ago.
Well, it was probably worth, what, 5 now?
Yeah.
Something
so
like that.
how do you earn a living without compensation? You have to go on a benefit.
Get a job.
Well, David Bain's got a job.
He's got a job, yeah.
Yeah, he's doing something.
A significant number of the population.
He's living in Waiuku or South Auckland.
Yeah, happy to give him a job and believe he's innocent. So there we go. On that note, we'll take a break. Stay with us, we'll be back. Right. We've talked about a few things tonight, but I want you to give us your comments, Carolyn, on this X Factor judging fracas. What else can we call it? Joe Irvine attacked by Natalia Kills and Willie Moon. I mean, who are these people anyway? That was I don't know much about music. I thought, who are they?
Yeah.
I've never heard of them before.
They're not really well known.
No.
She's had involvement.
Now.
They are now.
Yeah.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
She's had involvement with Madonna, and he's got a song that some people would recognise.
A song.
But I mean, the question is, they that 50,000 comments on social media about what happened, and there are judges that have said all kinds of things to contestants on these shows before, but they're cast in those roles. So I think the good question is how much of it was a setup, and how much did whoever set it up, the producers perhaps of X Factor, how much did they realise what it was going to turn into? And I think they did set it up. I think they would have seen him rehearsing, they would have seen what he was wearing, they would have said, you're going to say this, you're going to say this, you're going to say this. And I don't think they expected it to roll out into what it became. I mean, that backlash was such a chronic backlash against the judges. They really had no option but to move them on.
Maybe that would have been part of it too. John, from a business point of view, has it done X Factor any harm?
No, not at all, I'm sure.
Has it done
their ratings would have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
I guess it's brought some notoriety to Willie Moon and Natalia Kills. I've got a 13-year-old daughter, so I was sitting watching it.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah, that's my excuse for watching it.
He can admit he watched it.
Yeah, I admit I watched it. Parental supervision, that was why I was watching
it. Of course, yeah.
And I was watching it and listening to it, and I thought she was joking for a start. When Natalia Kills started her little tirade. And it just went on and on and on, just ratcheted up and up and up. And the poor guy, Joe Irvine, was sitting there.
Yeah.
Just trying to smile.
And I thought he handled it really well, actually.
Yeah.
I was staggered. And the same thought crossed my mind as everyone else, that it must be staged to have done that. That can't have just been impromptu.
Yeah.
But I suspect it did go beyond where they thought it was going to go.
Yeah, totally. Because there's been a lot meaner comments than that, really.
Yeah,
in the past.
But I think the particular Joe Irvine is a bit vulnerable, and I think to single him out for that treatment was particularly mean.
And I think
that's got people's backs up too.
And it was 2 against 1. Because he backed her up, and her delivery was not really. She said it, but then she kept banging on about it, and it wasn't. It didn't seem all that genuine. I think, and there's that sort of element of the people sort of went off. Plus, to call him a hypocrite for wearing a suit and having gel in his hair. I mean, Willie Moon's obviously copying somebody else.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, we could say the exact same thing about
exactly.
You're wearing a shirt.
You're wearing Tom's shirt.
That's
Don't you have any creativity?
I tell Tom.
Yeah. But no, I mean, to answer your question, would it have done the business any harm? I'm sure it hasn't.
No.
I mean, their ratings have just skyrocketed.
I think people were leaving, watching that show in their droves, because those two didn't really fit for a New Zealand audience, and now they're gone, and they get to bring a whole lot of people back on again.
And in a couple of years' time, this is my contention anyway, whose name will you remember who was on the X Factor, there? Who will be still the name in everybody's minds? It'll be Joe Irvine. Yeah. He's taken a bit of a hit, but I'll tell you what, his name will not leave people's minds for a long time.
And I'm sure
as the guy who was attacked.
It might keep him in the show longer than what he might otherwise have been.
Exactly.
Because people have got that, they want to support him now.
Yeah.
And people who watch that show and those sorts of shows don't...
Like me.
Like
John.
Really don't realise how much of it is scripted and how much of it is staged. So, and I think that's suddenly dawning on people. I didn't realise. I watch a lot of those sorts of shows, and I didn't realise that to that level. Why get judges if they're just going to be told, what to say?
And and of course, what we see, the show that we see, is not the full thing. There's a lot of footage in there which is not broadcast, not put in the final cut.
I didn't think it was that clever an idea to have a husband and wife as judges either, because it's very hard for them to be independent, have independent views when they're sitting beside each other.
Right.
That I think their natural inclination is going to be to support each other's views.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's very sensible.
Well, she did that.
I know.
He did.
But you could see him sitting there feeling a little bit uncomfortable.
Well, he seemed
but he still supported it, and then he came out with some of his own, talking about Psycho.
Yeah, adding to it.
Guy Perkins.
You're kind of wondering, when he said that, I thought, this almost seems pre-planned, to actually make that comparison. Unless you're pretty quick off the mark. If you're just a normal commentator who's talking all the time on the air or whatever, you might. But it just seemed to me to be something which looked like a bit more thought had gone into it, quite frankly.
They're quite personal, aren't they? And they're quite personal to Steve Broader. Did you? Yeah. That was really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't actually see his performance, but I saw her reaction. Her reaction to his performance made me uncomfortable. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was just too personal about what she said about him, and if I was him, I would have felt, quite violated by what she said.
Yeah.
We won't go into it.
Well, no, we won't go into it.
But it wasn't the one that made the news.
Okay, right. Yeah, no, I didn't see that.
Yeah, she was going for the jugular.
Speaking of broadcasting, it seems like the BBC are killing the goose that lays the golden egg.
Is that how you see it, pal?
Yeah, I do. I think that earns 350 million for them, is it? Or was that far too much?
It's a lot of money.
No, 35 million, whatever it is, per year. That show, highly successful. They've apparently got a waiting list for the audience. Of course, here we're talking about Jeremy Clarkson and Top Gear, and it's been in the papers, all in the news for a while, that Jeremy came home after a hard day's filming, or back to the high-class hotel, and found that the chefs had taken off. There was basically nothing to eat except cold food. But anyway, and it looks like the BBC, there's a possibility he might be fired. I actually don't believe he will be.
No, I don't either.
No.
I don't think he will.
No.
I don't think they can afford to let that go.
I mean, when you look at the kind of carry-on that happens in Hollywood and places like that, people shutting themselves in their trailers and refusing to come out, they don't fire them because they're going to make millions out of them.
Didn't he punch his producer? Yeah,
he did. But
that's not good.
A bit of a punch up, a bit of a stoush.
You can't go around punching people.
Well,
they fired those two judges for being rude.
For verbal abuse.
Yeah.
But they're not quite in the Jeremy Clarkson league.
No, they're not. No.
And I think I'd be very surprised if he doesn't continue in Top Gear. I have to say I've never watched Top Gear. I'm busy watching X Factor and programs like that.
I see that with your doing it, right?
Yeah. But I understand it's very popular.
But
that's why I have not watched X Factor, because I'm busy watching Top Gear. What are you going to say? Sorry.
I don't know. It just went out of my head. But Jeremy Clarkson reminds me of Charlie Sheen. It's that exact replica of a model, and they brought in somebody else who was good, and that they brought in Ashton Kutcher after he left. So they carried on without him, and then he went on to sort of implode Charlie Sheen. And I think Jeremy Clarkson's at risk of doing that as well. I know he's very popular, but he then went on and started to, went and was at a charity event and said the F word numerous times.
About the BBC.
And then wrote in his column, I hear today that somebody videoed me and put it online. Well, of course they did. Yeah. That's what people are going to do, and he would have known that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think it's right that he stays, but I think he will. Yeah. I just don't think they can afford to live.
My question is that they know what Clarkson's like.
Yeah.
They know what Clarkson's like, and yet, when you know somebody's sometimes a bit difficult to manage and whatnot, you kind of arrange the chairs accordingly, don't you? You sort of.
But it's
so
also
that,
part of his appeal, I think.
Yes, yeah, and
that,
so you
that
say,
is a bit of a
look, for
maverick.
goodness sake, I'm sorry, guys, you're wanting to go home. Well, what's it going to cost us to keep here for a couple of hours? Because if you're not here, we're going to have trouble if Clarkson gets back here. It's happened before. I imagine that this management problem is not something that just popped up out of the blue. They know he's difficult to manage, and so they must have been holding their breath waiting for it, and it happened.
It's not that though. It's the equivalent of you going out and punching. Is it Andy?
Yeah.
It's not okay.
I'd come off second best.
It's not okay to go and punch Andy and then to say, well, I'm a bit temperamental, you know. So that's what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And not only that, but then he went on and did the next thing he did, having a tirade and really bad-mouthing the BBC. And then the next thing he did, then people... It becomes the sort of clash of wills.
Do you think he's trying to get sacked, or he's actually had enough? And you know?
I don't think they're killing the goose that laid the golden egg. I think that they're just parting ways with the goose, and then he's going over here and laying a golden egg somewhere else.
Goose might be the operative word, mightn't it?
Yeah, it might be indeed. He's got huge support.
How many offers do you think he's already had for his own show and for, you know, to be the Prime Minister? And he will have a lot of offers, and he's probably thinking, well, maybe I should.
You wonder, because he has been saying that. He's been saying, you know, maybe it's time for the dinosaur to go. He's only 54 years old. So he's only 54. He looks older, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
He does. But as he said himself, well, he said, I smoke too much, drink too much, and do something else too much. I mean, you know, eating the wrong food.
I think he's going to segue out, and I think it's exactly like Paul Henry. He'll segue out, have a bit of a break, and he'll come back.
Circle round a few times, then re-land.
And he'll be the master of the world.
When is Paul Henry back?
Well, I mean, he was away.
He's coming back.
Well, he's already back in his show.
He's got another show in the evenings, yeah.
The Paul Henry show.
Oh, yes,
it's been on for a long time.
No, that's gone.
He's gone from that.
Yeah, but before that, he was out. Like he was.
But I think he is coming back.
There was a problem, Oh, he'll keep circulating back.
He's coming back to be the master of the universe.
A rare talent. I mean, there's
so
not many people. Yeah, not many people around like him.
No,
but I would say, I mean, the BBC, they're trying to make money, of course, and stuff like that. I would say there'll be some heads and hands over this one. But as it was pointed out by one commentator, they're sort of damned if they do and if they don't, no matter which way they go. If they've done nothing, well, they should have done something. And if they do something, they shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
It's just his history as well. If there's something coming every 2 months that Jeremy Clarkson's going to drag you through the mud, how long are you going to put up with it?
Interesting point of view. Yeah, trying to manage difficult situations. Speaking of people, segueing into people that are different characters. Of course, we got Winston up there in Northland. The government has got to be worried about this because they've been throwing all kinds of things at it. And the latest thing is, of course, we've got the national candidates start getting into personal abuse. Yeah. How's that going to go down, do you reckon, John, up there in Northland? How are people going to react to that?
If you look at the polls before I came here tonight, and it's neck and neck.
Is it still?
Between Winston and, is it Mark Osborne, the national candidate. I don't know that promising 10 Bridges does National any favours, actually, coming out with that sort of pork barrel politics.
Right.
Because I think people see it for what it is. But having said that, it's been on the planning for a long time. It's just they happen to have announced it again during this election. So you could argue that it's just part of an election campaign. I'm just not sure about Winston, whether he will make it. I wonder when people get into the ballot box and they have the option, whether they would vote for him or not. I mean, it's by-elections are notoriously an opportunity to protest against the government, but this is a government that's only been back in office 4 months. So whether there's much of an element of that protest vote remains to be seen.
It seems that a lot of people are saying they're going to vote. You know,
I guess it could bring out the vote.
And big turnouts.
That's people usually say that when they're voting against an incumbent.
Right.
That's usually why.
Yeah, and you know, big turnouts we know favour the left. So what makes it, who's the left? Yeah, that's right. I mean,
who's left on the left?
Yeah.
Winston's got to be left of the right.
Yes, well, he's more likely to be favoured by Labor voters than National.
Well, that's the other controversy was that the Labor candidate, what is her name?
Willow Jean Prime.
So we hardly know. Yeah.
They had flyers go out for her.
Yes.
That said vote Willow, and then when they realised that's probably not the best move. Labor basically told all their constituents, actually vote for Winston, don't vote for Willow, and they changed the flyers. They took the vote out of it and just said, vote in there, vote, your vote counts, and they sort of said, and here's Willow. But
which I suppose is strategic.
Yeah,
Poor Willow.
I don't think there's anything wrong with Andrew Little, whether he says it overtly or not, or specifically. I don't see anything wrong with them saying, well, the most effective way for us as a collective opposition to damage the government is for us to vote strategically.
Because they are the opposition.
But what makes them think that Winston will play their game once he's in?
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I don't know that anyone could comfortably guarantee that with Winston.
They couldn't break him in.
No. It'll be interesting.
He's a wild Brumby.
But it's, if the alternative is another national MP or someone who's in opposition, if they want to achieve someone in opposition, I think they've got a better opportunity to do that by voting Winston than by voting Willow Jean Prime.
Oh, definitely. But they vote Willow Jean Prime, there's going to be a national candidate. It's going to be a national member.
So
of
it doesn't help
Parliament.
the opposition's cause at all, the collective opposition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that people have probably picked up on that. And it'll just. I mean, it's going to be a cliffhanger, and I think that we'll be almost hanging on the edge of it as much as I certainly will be in the weekend.
When is it?
Well, it's Saturday, the 28th, and just to see exactly what happens, because it's going to have a big effect, or it could do. I mean,
Winston's from Northland, of course, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, he's originally from up there, so you'll have some element of support just for that.
Absolutely. I mean, when I read the synopsis of his biography, I haven't read the whole lot, I was actually quite surprised at the guy's background. Described as being the person who actually inspired Dame Fina Cooper in the Land Marches, and a guy who in his younger days...
Who described him as that? Was that Winston?
No, it wasn't.
His own assessment, was it?
It was the reviewer, and talking about his biography and saying the stuff you never knew about him, and he gave countless hours to, I suppose, Northland Māori in particular, with regard to land rights and reclaiming their rights and whatnot. He actually was heavily involved. I think maybe in Bastion Point as well. He's just changed his focus since he's been in Parliament. But as you do, I guess.
Well, he's a chameleon, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's a chameleon. He was on the news with his microphone in the middle of the street.
I saw that last
What was he doing?
He was in the
Legalising
main
marijuana
street somewhere. Yeah,
Yes.
he saw these likely-looking people coming towards him, and he said, "Do you want me to legalise marijuana?" And they said something, and he said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll run a referendum, and if it comes in that yes, then I will." He just left
He just
it
got
there.
cut off.
Nothing actually happened.
Oh, it's funny.
And then he said, "Oh no." Well, the news reported that he said he actually wouldn't legalise marijuana, but then he never actually said that himself. He just said, "Oh, I never smoked it."
Right.
But there's a chameleon for sure.
Oh, absolutely. We've actually got a couple of minutes left before we're going to go to another break. Carolyn, I want you to talk to us, as an ex-city councillor, what you feel about the idea of the council putting further investment into the Scottish Hall.
There's no way around it. The council's already tried to extract itself from the Scottish Hall. I spent years trying to extract itself from the Scottish Hall. Tim always described it as a gift horse.
Right.
That's a gift horse you should have. You should look in the mouth.
You should look in the mouth.
Yeah, they sort of ended up with it, and they tried to get out of it again and couldn't. Tried really hard to get out of it and couldn't.
It's a significant building in town, though, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, what else are you going to do with it once it is there? It's fairly central to the plans for redeveloping, and if it was doing well, it could go really well.
Right.
So I think you do have to invest in something like that. Otherwise, it's going to go backwards and become a complete
if it's
think,
needed
John,
in the community and it's being utilised by the community, then absolutely it's a core council asset.
Right.
It's a sort of asset the council hold. I was a bit concerned from a community trust perspective, I guess, when there was discussion about handing it over to a community organisation to run. Well, who do they think is going to pay for that? And they would come to funding agencies like ours to pay for it. And I was thinking, well, is this council simply stepping out of their responsibility and handing it over to someone else? So, yeah, I think it's a good outcome, and I think it's appropriate that we invest in it to bring it up to a standard where it can be used. I was interested in Richard King's comments in the paper this morning that I think it's up to 60% of earthquake standard, which is a lot higher than a lot of other buildings have been found to be around town. So it's it's worth reinvesting in, and that's what
particularly from the point of view of even an emergency centre, I suppose.
Over the years too, people, while it wasn't open, they regularly had people asking to hire it. So there is a demand there, even though it was clearly shut. There was quite a demand. So now that there's a sign up and there's the market outside, I think it's you're just going to have to bite the bullet
and get it done
and just nail it.
Yeah. Well, if the use is going to be there, if people are going to be able to get some benefit from it, the thing isn't that derelict it needs a digger through it. It just needs to tidy up, obviously. And there is some heritage there too, isn't there?
Oh, for sure. That's why there was so much uproar about it going.
The Scottish
it's all about the heritage.
Yes,
and the dance floor, it's really well sprung, I think.
Okay.
A really good dance floor for dancing.
Bouncing.
Right.
Right. So we do need that because we don't have too many of those in Invercargill.
We do not.
No,
I think I would go so far as to say it's the only one.
Is it?
The St Mary's Hall, but it's not really. It's used now and again.
Yes.
But it's got
a sprung floor.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Of course, there's always the stadium, which has its multiple uses.
Slightly different, though, isn't it?
It's slightly different
Dancing
indeed.
in the stadium.
Exactly. We're going to take another break. Stay with us. When we come back, it'll be topics of interest, and we've got a couple of good ones today. See you shortly. Before we go to topics of interest, Carolyn, there was something that was on your mind as well as your topic of interest. Tell us about it. King Richard's funeral. She's also got a topic of interest, but King Richard.
That was quite topical and, absolutely fascinating.
Right.
That King Richard III has been underneath a car park in Leicester, not under the car park for 500 years, but down there for 500 years. He's been down there, and they had a hunch he was there. And they went looking for him, I think it was in 2012, and found him, but they've left him there until now because of the car park, which I wouldn't have, I would have just gone for it.
No money to get out.
Parking on a dead man's grave.
So,
no money to get out.
I think it's just phenomenal that they've found him, they've excavated him, they've had a pretty big funeral, taken him through the streets and things. King, but he was a bit of a controversial king. He was the one that they thought
He's a fairly notorious character.
Had his nephews murdered,
right,
so that he could take power. But his relatives helped to prove who he was because of the DNA.
Through DNA,
yeah. So it was just a really interesting story, and the thing that stood out to me is that he had all his teeth. One tooth was missing out of the skull, and they were big. Well, like John Prenergast's teeth. They were big, white, straight. One was missing. And I thought, how on earth, in those days, without fluoride, did his teeth last so well? And for 500 years.
Yeah, 500 years.
You go back and look at the picture in the paper online.
Was it just a big skull with a full set of teeth?
Big skull, full set of teeth, and one missing.
But when you consider what we eat compared to what they eat, they had a low sugar diet. I mean, sugar was hard to obtain back then.
I guess.
Now it's produced.
Imagine that. But Elizabeth I had black teeth, didn't she? Or because they said everybody did in those days.
Oh, how interesting!
This guy's teeth are awesome.
Maybe Kieran O'Neill had been over there.
Who's Kieran O'Neill?
He was a dentist.
Maybe he bit his nephews.
I was fascinated to see the procession through the streets yesterday on the news.
Yes.
It wasn't quite Princess Diana's funeral, but they had a carriage going through the streets.
People were lining the streets to see it go by.
10, 20 deep.
Yeah.
Unbelievable, actually. Unbelievable that they found him and that they were able to confirm that it was him.
Through DNA. It couldn't have happened, 20 years ago, probably.
No, probably not. No.
But that's amazing. That was something which was, if he was there, it was due to happen once they found it. There's no question about it.
They said he was in an old friary. Well, what is a friary?
A friary was where friars lived, like monks.
So why was he in a friary, I wonder?
I don't know. Could have
been. He had a big piece out of his skull.
Yes.
Yeah. The rest of the skull was fine, and there was a big sort of chunk out of it.
Not good for the brain. No. I kind of wonder if now that he's turned up, whether we'll be seeing other stories.
Are there any other missing monarchs?
I'm not
sure.
Or
are they all accounted for?
I'm sure there are around the world somewhere. I mean, we had a whole monarchy. There's been a monarchy in Holland. There've been most European countries actually.
Yeah, we had them.
Germany, France, Spain.
Monica Lewinsky.
I didn't go there.
Spare us. Spare us.
Not missing?
No.
She's not missing.
No.
She's doing something for Weight Watchers.
Oh, well, good. Doing something positive.
Anyway, that was my thing.
Well, another one
That
I
was
wanted to talk
mine.
about actually was the fact that it seems like we have a company who's taking advantage of the legislation to say that their staff will no longer be entitled to take meal breaks. This is very un-Kiwi.
This is Cotton On you're talking about.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I was surprised that that's good, and I don't know the legislation in detail, but my understanding of it was that it was to introduce flexibility around when staff took tea breaks and lunch breaks, not to do away with them altogether. But it seems that Cotton On are trying to do away with them.
I
was
don't
very
think it's
surprised.
that. I think it sounds like that.
Yeah.
But actually, you can be paid out for them if it's not feasible to take
But it
them.
would have to be. That would have to be by agreement, I'd imagine.
It has to be by agreement.
That's the bit I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it would have to be by agreement, and it's designed for this situation where, like at Invercargill Airport, I guess we might only have one air traffic controller on. Very difficult for him to leave his post. He probably doesn't want to anyway. He can have a bite to eat while he's there, or whatever. And you know, so 2 or 3 minutes away to go to the loo might be fine, but half an hour off for lunch doesn't work. And I think those situations had always been there, and the government was legalising them. There was controversy over the legislation at the time because some people said, well, it just had too many corridors in it. And clearly this is one of them.
Yeah, it seems to be. Because that was a concern that it was going to diminish workers' rights.
Yes.
And that seems to be
My
being
question is,
tested by this
why
case.
would an employer want to do that to their employees? You know, why would they actually want to do it if they want to
Well,
get...
I don't think they would. I think there's an interpretation issue here.
Yes.
And if they're saying you can't take, you don't have to, the breaks are not mandatory anymore. They're not, it's not required by law. And I feel like, I don't know Cotton On, but I'm sure they're going to work out something that works for everybody.
They'd have to, wouldn't they?
Because disgruntled employees is the last thing that you want. And people always equalise. So if they feel like something's been taken away from them, they're just going to equalise somewhere else. They're going to take
Well, let's hope they sort it out. I think most people see it as a dangerous precedent. Well, the comparison has been made, of course, to some of the countries from which we get our goods. Where people, there's no question about it, they work in factories and they work for 12 hours a day and they have very few breaks and they are stood over while they work. An observation I've made on the show before, and I'll make it again because I think it deserves being made, is I heard a most interesting, what I suppose you call a documentary at one stage on national radio, and they were talking to either warehouse management or a guy who worked for them in China, and he was their man on the job to make sure that goods for the warehouse were not being produced under un-Kiwi-like conditions. He was there to make sure the workers were being properly paid and that they weren't being abused, and the suggestion was that if he saw anything like that, he just got on the blower, backed home, and the warehouse said, we don't want anything more from you, because they were trying to maintain some good working conditions and wages for, you know, overseas workers who were supplying them. I thought, good on the warehouse, you know. It's great.
I mean, I guess that if you think of Sir Stephen Tyndall and Margaret Tyndall, who own the warehouse, New Zealander of the Year, the profits that they make from their shareholding in the warehouse goes to the Tyndall Foundation, which they used to give grants to help people in New Zealand. So I imagine the last thing they'd want to be doing is helping people in New Zealand by exploiting people offshore.
Very reflective of, I'd say, Stephen Tyndall's philosophy, if I may say so, Stephen Tyndall. But so I was gratified to hear that. And I guess people are looking and saying, well, this kind of thing, maybe it's the thin end of a wedge, and we could be subject to some of those conditions that are overseas that we
I suspect
try to avoid.
I saw someone post on Facebook a couple of days ago that just sort of having a whinge about their job, saying, I hate my job. She said she had to work 6 hours and 20 minutes without a break. So that's from 8 a.m. till 2:20, no break. So it's obviously is happening.
And sometimes that happens. I mean, I'll often work through lunch and that sort of thing. Because you need to get something done or whatever.
It's the choice.
It's that flexibility
It's
that
the
the
choice
legislation
thing.
was endeavouring to introduce, I think, to allow for that. And this is probably the first case that's testing the boundaries of that. And so it's getting a bit of publicity.
Which is good. Topics of interest, you're first.
I was going to talk about The Bachelor. I was weighing up.
Yeah, I knew, that's why I said you're first. I was waiting to see what you'd say.
I was going to weigh up between The Bachelor and cholesterol. I did want to. Cholesterol is a very interesting issue. But The Bachelor is more topical, I think.
Right, I think it is. Yes.
It's the first New Zealand Bachelor. really popular, and I think the thing about this one is we know people in it.
Yes, indeed,
And
we
you guys
do.
probably don't.
There's a teacher from Southland in it.
Yeah, there's
It's not you, Bill, is it?
No, not.
No.
No, someone I know, actually, a couple of those ones have been through the system down here. So yeah, recognise a few faces.
So we know people in it, and the thing about it is that you be watching it, and then someone will text someone else in the vicinity of you on, will put something on Facebook and say, oh, so and so knows him, and they think he's got a girlfriend, and maybe it's not for real. And
right.
blah, blah, blah. So there's all sort of additional information coming in behind the scenes, and I don't know how they keep it a secret, because was there 20-something girls originally, all having to get time off work, all having to actually make up stories for their friends and family of where they were going, because if they were away for the whole time, it'd be 14 weeks away. Goodness, so they all had to make up a story of where they were going, and if they were away for that much time, it would have to cover it. Then coming back, so if they got voted off on the first night, they've come back to their job, and then once the show's gone to air, people will know that they're back at work, so they know it wasn't you. So by the powers of deduction, if somebody out there knows who the last few people are.
Oh, you'd like to know.
I don't know.
Can you please Facebook Carolyn and tell her?
I'm sure. I'm pretty sure. I know how it is.
Just because I've got it worked. I actually think they're very brave going on it. And
I don't think they realise what they're letting themselves in for.
Yeah. It's not something, if I was in that position, I think I would do. But
you wouldn't be.
No, you wouldn't be in that position.
No, I would not. I would not. Definitely not be in that position.
They don't know what they.
Although with that shirt, you never know you don't.
Yeah. Your turn, John.
St Bede's.
Yes.
The rowing debacle. I guess I'm surprised, and thinking about it, I'm surprised at the boys' behaviour. Not that that's not something you wouldn't expect from teenage boys, but given that St Bede's got into trouble last year,
yes, indeed they
at
did.
the regatta with their behaviour, they were sent away this year having signed up to a code of conduct, and they breached that. So I don't know what they were thinking, apart from being teenage boys, but so I'm surprised they did what they did. I'm a bit surprised at the punishment that the school decided was fair and reasonable, only because, and I'm looking at it from a distance, so I don't know the detail of it, but the punishment seems to be much wider than just the two boys who misbehaved.
Right.
That it affects the whole team.
Right.
That's true. And the school.
Yeah, and the school I'm not too worried about, but the fact that it affects the rest of the team so badly, because rowing's not, and we remember Lay Down Sally, where that Australian rower lay down in the 8 and stopped rowing, and so that affects the whole team. They can't function if someone's doing that. And it's the same with this. If you take a couple of boys out of a crew, it doesn't help the crew very much. So I was surprised at that punishment.
That's a good point.
But I'm also surprised at the media reaction, really, to the injunction, because it's an interim injunction, and the whole purpose of an interim injunction, as I understand it, is to maintain the status quo until there's time to sit down sensibly and reasonably to work through the arguments around the issue. And if you think back to 1985, I think it was, when the All Black tour to South Africa was called off because of an interim injunction.
That's right.
It wasn't the final decision, it was just an interim injunction by the judge. Had the impact of cancelling that tour.
That's right.
So I don't even know if they went to the final court hearing to hear the full substantial argument later on. And I'm surprised at myself for saying that, because as a board chair of a school, it's really difficult to maintain discipline, I'd imagine, if you've got litigious parents firing off to the court.
Who can afford it?
Yeah, but it is a remedy that's available to them, so they can do that. Yeah, it makes it difficult for schools.
It does.
But I do question the decision of the school to impose a punishment that affected much more than just the two boys who were stupid.
And up against that is the question of just how important was it? It was only a sports trip, you know.
To Māori Cup.
To the Māori Cup, but it's still only a sports trip. And we've seen a couple of cases of this now where it seems like that if the school seems to make what's always seemed to be a reasonable kind of decision, whether they be good or bad, schools have got a responsibility to make those decisions. There's making them all the time. That if you're a rich parent, you can challenge it. But bad luck if you live in one of the state houses that's being sold and can't afford a lawyer, because I'm sorry, you won't be in the team. And that's really
You
what,
wouldn't-
to me.
It's not unlike you being the team
Well,
to start
I mean, you
with.
won't stay in the team if you do something bad. Yeah.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. And that's the point that's made just from some of my colleagues are saying, it's just a rule for the rich. And
Well, it's a legal system that's available to everyone.
yes.
They've certainly had the ability to seek recourse through that legal system.
Couldn't you use community law if you didn't have the money to do it?
I don't know if you could ring up the judge.
But if you do it so quickly.
Yeah, you need a lawyer to do that who's got contact with the judge to ring them up, have a telephone conversation, and say, "Can I have an injunction?"
What about the kid from the State House though, who's in the rowing 8, say?
Yes,
Who's let down badly by those other two?
it's a very strong point, John.
And because of their punishment, what happens to him?
It's a very strong
He
point.
misses out too. And that's the bit that I don't quite
But
get.
I wonder if they didn't have 2 reserves there.
They did have reserves that they
They
could
did
have
have
put
reserves,
in.
yeah. And so the reserves have been. So
But they
the
wouldn't have been
boys
as
who were
good.
naughty still got to row, and the reserves still didn't get a chance.
No.
Yeah. on that unhappy note. Oh, great. Thank you very much to my panel for a vibrant discussion tonight. As always, great. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, John Prenergast.
Wow.
And that's all from us this week. We'll see you later.